today's topic, and thanks everyone for joining. It looks like we got several that has joined, so thank you for your participation. Leslie, again, thank you for putting on this presentation, and of course the GRMCA group for getting it out there to our members. As a safety committee chairman, it's our goal to present data on a monthly, quarterly basis that we can use not only in our realm, the scope of safety and environmental, but as well as through membership involvement, and also for us to making sure that we're headed in the right direction with all the changes that are coming to our state and across the country. So, Leslie, this topic has been on the table for a very long while, and Leslie brought it to our attention several months ago that it's here, and so I appreciate her stepping in. Leslie Prince is a GRMCA member as well as a Georgia State affiliate of the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association, and she is also uh, the founding owner of Compliance Systems. And so, Leslie, without further ado, I'm going to give it over to you and let you
Thanks.
finish it up and let you get going.
All right, thanks so much. We are going to talk today about drug and alcohol testing, and just when you thought you knew everything, the regulations have changed. Back in June of last year, the Department of Transportation oral fluid final rule became effective. Um, the only kind of caveat to that was that just like with DOT urine testing, the labs do have to be certified to do it. They have to be certified by the Department of Health and Human Services. You'll see that in the slides referred to as HHS. And think about HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, as the scientist behind everything we do for drug and alcohol testing. Because all of our um, the livelihood and the jobs and the safety of the traveling public is in the hands of our professional drivers and our professional pilots and boat captains and railroad captains and subway drivers. All of those folks are in the DOT testing pool, but we've got to do it in a scientific manner. It's got to be valid testing that we can have confidence in. And so HHS makes sure that everything we do is scientifically based. We had to wait to implement the actual oral fluid testing rules because we did not have two labs that were certified by HHS. And quite honestly, we still don't. Now, we do have 9 labs, not 9 lives, but 9 labs that have submitted their certification packets to the Department of Health and Human Services to achieve the certification that's required for testing. We have to have 2 labs because just like with drug urine testing, when you pee in the cup, we split it into 2 vials and send both of those vials to the laboratory. We have to do the same thing for oral fluid testing. That split specimen testing methodology and requirement has not changed. It usually takes about 3 to 6 months to get the lab certified from the time they submit their packet to the Department of Health and Human Services and the DOT. They have promised us that they will fast track the certification, so it'll still be scientifically valid. They will just expedite it as much as they possibly can. We know that at least one lab submitted their certification probably 2 to 3 months ago, so it should be happening rather quickly. There are not that many labs that are out there. You've got Quest, you've got CRL, LabCorp, Abbott. So it's just, it's the same labs that we've always worked with. Now, one thing to keep in mind, Quest Laboratory used to have 3 testing labs. They even used to have one here in Atlanta. They are consolidating all of their toxicology into their lab in Kansas. And so all of their other labs are going away as far as toxicology goes. So just Quest is down to just the one lab. So it is taking, we've got to make sure that we've got multiple labs that are available to meet the demand, plus to meet the regulation when it comes to the actual split testing requirement. Oral fluid testing is approved and authorized for all DOT agencies. It did require changes from all agencies except for Coast Guard and PHMSA, so FAA, FMCSA, FTA, and FRA. So, but those changes have been made to the rules, and so we can start as as soon as the labs are approved, we can implement the testing process. Again, the rule was approved on June 1st of 2023. It's just taken us a while to get there. So let's talk about oral testing. So when we say oral fluid testing, we mean saliva testing. So think about it this way. We're going to give you a lollipop. You're going to stick it under your tongue or stick it in your mouth. And at some point in time, it's going to become saturated and we're going to be able to split it into two pieces and send both of those to the lab. That's sort of the Cliff Notes version of oral fluid testing and how the process is going to work. But I want you all also to be able to visualize that in your head. There also may be a process where you sort of, and I know this sounds kind of, I'm just being practical and honest about it, sounds kind of gross, where you kind of spit into a tube and then it's going to split the specimen into two separate vials that we can send to the laboratory. So it's going to be, they call that the neat way. Um, the lollipop is going to probably be what comes out first, I think. But it's got to be, again, we've got to have a process where we can take the one device and split it into two portions. When oral fluid started, we started first talking about oral fluid testing, I thought, okay, we've already got non-DOT oral fluid testing on the market. We can do that. I've got lots of clients that are doing that. And so we're just going to put two of those, kind of Q-tip looking things in your mouth at the same time, and that's how we're going to get our split test. But that is not how the regulation is written. I was very wrong. So it does have to be one collection that we can split into two pieces. So that's how that's going to work. But I think as we go through, if you sort of had to have a visual of how it's going to work, it makes it a little bit easier. So I wanted to present that first. Um, so oral fluid collections are directly observed. You've heard about direct observed collections because if someone tries to cheat on a test, on a urine test, when they go in and give their second specimen, someone has to go in with them of the same gender, watch them use the bathroom. Very uncomfortable. Nobody likes it. So this is going to be a less intrusive way to complete the direct observed collections. And they're all going to be direct observed. So when you're doing oral fluid testing, there will be no going into the bathroom. We're going to sit down at the collection site. We will be in front of each other. You'll pick your lollipop, we'll put it in your mouth, and I will just sit there and watch you. So it's direct observed. So that's how the process is going to work. And that's one of the benefits to it. The people can't cheat. You're not sending them into the restroom with a cup where they're going to shut the door. And if they've brought a specimen with them or they've been out to the truck stop or the convenience store on the corner and they've picked up their bottle of UPass, that's not going to happen because we're going to be standing there with them watching the collection happen. As I mentioned earlier, oral fluid testing has already been out in a non-DOT environment. So um, if you ever have a post-accident or anything like that, you can use oral fluid testing already as long as it's non-DOT. Um, the labs tabulate those positive rates, and really the positive rate for oral fluid testing is the same as urine testing. That's a big thing to keep in mind because the look back period, especially for marijuana on an oral fluid test, is much shorter than the look back period on a urine test. So since the history of drug testing started 35 years ago, we've told you that marijuana stays in your system for 30 days. We can pick it up in your urine for 2 to 4 weeks, depending on usage. The time that it stays in your saliva that we can get it is only about 2 days. However, so your look back period is probably a tenth of what it is for urine testing, but the positive rates on non-DOT tests are just about equal because people can't cheat on the collections. That just tells you how much cheating is actually going on. Super important that you're using good collection sites to do your collections. The folks are trained and they know what fake urine looks like, that they can pick it up. Because I promise you, used to be we'd get a lot of cold samples. People would have, they'd bring somebody else's sample in with them. It would lose body temperature. Right now, we're getting fake urine more than we're getting cold samples. And so collectors have got to be able to pick that out. Um, so super important. I can pick it out I can tell you once I look at a specimen if it's fake in about a second and a half. So that's kind of a little bit about oral fluid testing. Now, what do you as employers have to do? There's work that you can start doing. Again, we've probably got 3 to 4 months maybe before we're really into the heart of it, but you can do things right now. Number one, you've got to update your policies. We'll talk a little bit about when you have to do oral fluid testing in just a minute. It's optional in most situations. You can stick with urine testing if you want to, but oral fluid testing there's definitely a place for it, and we want to have that conversation about when is a good time to add it. If you're a union shop, you may need to update your collective bargaining agreements. And you must have standing orders. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, because you've got to be able to tell your collection sites what you want to do. If you don't tell your collection site, our company is always going to do oral fluid testing on post-accident reasonable suspicion. If they don't know that, they're going to have to call you each time they do a collection because they have to know what to do. And again, you've got 4 to 6 months to get ready. I promise you, football season starts on Saturday, then we go into the holidays, and so you better start getting ready now. Okay, a couple things to know. You, as the employer, not the employee, will choose whether you do oral fluid testing or urine testing. You can go back and forth. We'll talk about that when we get to the standing order. Um, if you have to do a shy bladder, meaning if the person comes to the clinic, to the collection site, and you typically do a urine test, but they can't go, then you can reflex to an oral fluid test. So you eliminate that person being off the job for an hour or two. You can immediately do the oral fluid test. So that's a huge thing. And then, of course, if they're trying to cheat on their test, they give us a cold sample, a hot sample, one that's got bleach in it, or a fake urine sample. Then, if we would ordinarily have to do a direct observed collection, we can reflex to the oral fluid collection.
Hey,
So,
Leslie.
yes,
Hey, this is a topic that I've been away from for a good while, so bear with my ignorance. So, a question that comes to mind for me is the oral fluid, um, is that going to be the future? I mean, in other words, are we going to see a transition away from the urine sample? Do you see what I'm asking? I'm
yeah,
just trying to understand.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yes. In some situations, yes. In not all situations, I think people may stick with urine testing for pre-employment because you do have that longer look back period, and
okay,
sometimes folks want that. But
right.
there will be a place definitely for oral fluid testing. And I imagine that most of our employers will have a combination of both. Maybe
So,
they're
so
going
to
to
be
do urine testing for pre-employment and random, oral fluid testing for post-accident reasonable suspicion.
so that I'm crystal clear, it sounds like the primary distinction is that look back period. Is that pretty
That
accurate?
that's the one distinction, and then the other distinction, as we just talked about, is the all collections are direct observed, so the person
Right,
can't
right.
cheat.
I got
Yep.
you.
So
There
you're
we
going
go.
to minimize your opportunity for cheating.
Okay, very
Yeah.
good.
Cool. So great questions, Bill. Thanks for asking. So you've got to make sure as employers that you've got, the collection sites that you're using are being trained, that they understand that oral fluid testing is coming down the pike and that they're preparing for that. We are starting in October to actually train collectors. Right now in DESA, which is the largest of our industry associations, has a great program to train trainers. I'm actually one of the master trainers, and so we're working through that. But starting in October, we will be training actual collectors. And so it's not too early to be talking to your collection sites to find out what they're doing and what they anticipate their training schedule to be. Um, so you need to be available to your collectors at all times. So especially if you run a 24/7 operation, if you're working nights and weekends, you have got to make sure that your collection sites have your contact information, your office phone number, your cell number, and then if you, God forbid, decide you're going to go to lunch or take a vacation, they've got to have a backup contact as well, with 24/7 contact information for there. So it's going to be super important that you are having those conversations with your collection sites and they absolutely know who to reach in your organization at all times. It's best practice to have a standing order in place with those instructions for your collection site. Again, if you don't have that in place, you're going to have to talk to your collection site every time they do a collection, and you don't want to do that. So I'll show you an example of a standing order in a minute. We'll talk through that. All right. So one thing that you will have to change in your policy is direct observe urine collections after oral fluid testing is available can no longer be done for transgender and non-binary individuals. And so you do have to make sure that you're making that change to your policy. Oral fluid testing must be done for all, our direct observed oral fluid testing must be done for all transgender and non-binary. So if you have somebody who's transgender who comes in for a urine test and there's no issue there, that's certainly fine. But if that person gives you a fake sample or a cold sample and you have to do the second collection that's observed and they're transgender, then you do have to do oral fluid testing. So that does need to be reflected in your policy. Um, let's see, moving on. Another change, that you might want to think about is to change your policy so that all collections that need to be direct observed. So anytime you get a fake sample, anytime you get a cold sample, and with return to duty and follow-up, if your policy allows you to do return to duty testing and then subsequently follow-up testing, those all have to be observed. So you can have in your policy that those are going to be done on oral fluid testing. So in situations, urine direct observed collections are not going away for anybody but transgender non-binary. But just because you can still do it doesn't mean you should. I promise you, if you've ever had to go into the bathroom and observe somebody given their sample, it's not a pleasant thing. And so doing the oral fluid test that is done outside the bathroom is preferable. But that is going to be your decision as an employer. Okay,
Can
policy
I
change.
pause you one more time? Again, from question out of my ignorance and lack of familiarity. Um, so it, are there preventive measures on the fake thing? In other words, surely there have been efforts to try to be very, very proactive on those, on the urine test. Any comment on that?
So fake urine is very prevalent. We spend lots of time when we're training new collectors on what fake urine looks like. But the people that are making the fake urine, I always say, Tommy Chong from Cheech and Chong, he, when his movie career stopped or he self-selected to not be in movies anymore, he actually went into the business of making products that can try to beat a drug test. And so he and all the other folks that are trying to make these products to beat a drug test are pretty good. And the fake urine now contains all the parameters of normal human urine, uric acid and all creatinine and all that kind of thing. Um, you have to be able to see it. It's a peculiar color of yellowish gold. It has no properties of human urine. And so as a collector, but it's up to the collection site to know what they're doing to be able to for those collectors to pick it up at the point of collection, because a lot of the time it will get by at the laboratory because it does resemble human urine from a scientific standpoint. Now, sometimes you'll get it and the pH will be really high, or it has a real chemically smell and we can pick it up that way. But by and large, they do pretty well with that with the fake stuff, and so the labs cannot, they can't distinguish it really well unless it's outside of the pH specific gravity creatinine that they measure. Okay, changes that have to be made. If your policy refers to urine and you're going to add oral fluid testing, you need to take the urine out of your policy. You might want to state the testing events when you are going to do oral fluid testing. It would be a good idea to state your employees do not have the option to choose, so you want to make that very clear. And then you also want to make sure that you're clear with that to your collection sites. And then make sure you're following. So when it comes to employers' DOT policy, 14 CFR Part 120 is actually the aviation section. You want to make sure that you're following 49 CFR Part 40, plus you want to follow Part 382, which is the FMCSA section. So the oral fluid testing is in Part 49 CFR Part 40. So we want to always make sure that we're still following that, because the only, nothing else has changed in Part 40 except for the addition of the option of oral fluid. Let's see. One thing too, again, you've got to make sure that your collection sites have your phone numbers, but also you want to make sure that on the chain of custodies that your collectors are putting their actual phone numbers. There are some of our collection sites, especially in mid to South Georgia, that have call centers. And so when you call the clinic, it goes into that call center. That is absolutely prohibited to be, that phone number cannot be on the chain of custody. It has to be a phone number where you as the employer or the medical review officer can get directly to the collector. So it has to be a direct number that someone answers. It cannot be going into a call center. So just make sure that when you're setting up new collection sites or when you're doing collection site audits, talk to them, make sure that the phone number that they're documented on the chain is a direct number that you, the lab, or the MRO can reach the collector if we need to. Okay, so standing orders, let's just talk about that a little bit, because again, this is the document that you want to provide to your collection site. Is it a requirement? No. It's a best practice, but it will have all the information that your collection site needs to know about your policies and about your program. Again, like I said earlier, if you don't have a document that you're providing to your collection site with your preferred policies, the collector will have to call you each time they start to do a collection so that they know what to do. They cannot do something that is contrary to your standing order unless they contact you and get that approved. That could be a problem if you have a collection site that just goes rogue and starts doing stuff that you don't want them to do. We need to, you as the employer need to rein them in and say, hey, this is what we've got in our standing order. You cannot deviate from that. And again, part of what we'll talk about is what you want to do if you do have problem collections. Where did that slide go? Oh, okay. So have you started thinking, there we go. Have you started thinking about your standing order? You also, if you're working with a third-party administrator, you need to make sure that they know what you want in your standing order. If you only want one methodology used, so you can still use all urine testing except in the direct observed transgender non-binary. You don't have to make any change at all. You can still use your urine testing. You just want to be clear about it. You can use the policy or the standing order I'm going to show you is available. It's open source. You can use it whatever, as much as you want, or you can develop your own. Okay, so this is it. And it's a little blurry, but I hope it's and again, I'll make this available to everybody. We'll send that out after we're finished today. So you're going to put your company name on it. So it says the following tables on this page and the next indicate the standing order for the company. So ABC Trucking Company or ABC Concrete Company, detailing the employer's protocols and instructions to collectors for administering DOT regulated tests. So for each reason for testing, pre-employment, random, reasonable cause, post-accident, return to duty follow-up, do you want urine or do you want to start with oral fluid? Okay, that's the first thing. And then if you have shy bladder, so if they can't go, do you want to do oral fluid testing? So you start with urine testing. If they can't go, do you want to do oral fluid testing? If you start with oral fluid testing, but they have dry mouth, meaning they can't provide enough saliva, do you want to go to urine testing? And if you have to do a direct observed, do you want to go to oral fluid testing if you're starting with urine testing? Okay, so these are the problem collections that can happen, and how do you want to handle those? So here's more problems. So direct observed collections because the collector observed materials. So if somebody brings something in to cheat with, and we find that when they empty their pockets and whatnot, do you want to do urine or oral fluid? If the specimen temperature is out of range, so below 90 or above 100, and that requires direct observe, do you want to do urine or oral fluid? If the original specimen appears to have been tampered with, so is it fake urine, or is it blue, or is it have bleach in it? Do you want to do urine or oral fluid? And then again, transgender non-binary, you must do oral fluid. That is required by DOT. So those are, we need to make sure that your collectors know in each of those circumstances what to do. Now, this last page is where you're going to indicate who's your DER, and what is their contact information, and then so and so reserves the right to revise the standing order. So the DER, that would be your DER name, reserves the right to revise it in the future. If the collector has two different copies, and the one that's dated last is the one that will take precedence. So again, this is just what you've got to provide to your collection site so they know what to do. So again, I want to just recap a little bit. So let's stop for just a minute and let me just kind of go through a couple of things about oral fluid testing. Number one, all the collections are direct observed. There's no taking a collection device into the bathroom, shutting the door, and doing your thing. So that eliminates the possibility of cheating. Also, direct oral fluid testing has a shorter look back period, especially for marijuana, than a urine test. So you want to think about that. So you want to maybe, if again, for pre-employment and random, do you want to continue to do urine testing? Or do you want to move to oral fluid? Again, because the ability to cheat is taken away, the positive rates for those two types of tests in a non-DOT environment have been pretty close. So you're not losing a whole lot. Another thing to think about is if I smoke the wacky weed, so let's say on my way to work, I'm coming to work for ABC Concrete Company, and I smoke a joint on the way to work. If I have an accident that morning, the marijuana has not metabolized through my system where you can pick it up in a urine test. It takes about 6 hours from the time of use to get through your system to be excreted into urine. However, with oral fluid testing, it happens within minutes. And so you would be able to pick that up in an oral fluid test. That's another thing to keep in mind. So also, people don't realize this. This is me getting on my marijuana soapbox now, but people are impaired for much longer than the high last after you smoke the wacky weed. So again, if I smoke, I talk to supervisors all the time who say, I don't care what my people do on the weekends. Well, you may not care what they do on the weekends, but you care what they do on Monday morning. And if they smoke on Saturday night, they are still impaired when they come to work on Monday morning. Things like depth perception, the ability to multitask, your peripheral perception, those things that, guess what? You need those things to drive a truck. They are still impaired because you can be impaired up to 36 hours after you smoke. That folks just don't realize the scientific studies are there. And if you want to spend time offline, I'm happy to go through those with you. But just know that the impairment lasts longer than, much longer than does the high. So in our non-DOT environment, folks say, a lot of times folks say, well, oral fluid testing can tell me if somebody is impaired at the time of the accident. Yes, it probably can, because think about it this way. The look back period, again, I said the look back period for marijuana on an oral fluid test is 36 to 48 hours, probably close to 36. That's also about the time the impairment lasts after you smoke. So if somebody has been at work and they test positive on an oral fluid test, you can reasonably assume, and the scientific evidence will back you up, that the person was impaired while they were at work. So that's something else to think about with oral fluid testing. Again, the real con for oral fluid testing is just the look back period, not as long specifically for marijuana. But other than that, not a whole lot of cons to that. One thing I will say, the collection process, and again, as I mentioned, we're starting to train people as collectors. The trainers are being trained now. As soon as the oral fluid devices are out on the market, which they're not quite yet, then we can really start doing the training, because when we do training, we have to do mock collections to make sure that the collector knows how to handle problem collections. Um, the um, the collectors will start to be trained, and so you'll want to, make sure that the folks that you're using have that on their radar screen, that they're doing that, because you've got to talk to them about the collection process. The collection process will take a little bit longer for oral fluid than it does for urine. If you've been doing urine collection like I have for 125 years, I can whip out a urine collection in about 6 minutes, no more than that, maybe 5. Oral fluid collection is going to take 10 to 12 minutes, maybe even 15 to do. So the collection process is going to take you a little bit longer, but it's just because the person has to sit there and accumulate the saliva into the collection device. And they have to be in our presence for 10 minutes before we can even do the collection, because your saliva repopulates, if you will, every 10 minutes. And so I'm sure the people are out there trying to figure out what they can manufacture to cheat on an oral fluid test. We don't want them to have that capability. So because of that, the regulation does require us to wait 10 minutes once the person begins the collection process before we can stick the little lollipop in their mouth. So it will take a little bit longer, but again, the ability to cheat is gone. So that's your pro and that's your con. That's how it's going to work. Now, what is one thing? So again, in June of 2023, that's when the oral fluid regulations came out. But there were some other things that were in that legislation that I do want to cover with you briefly. The first thing is refusal to test. In this regulation, the DOT reiterated what a refusal to test is and who determines it. Number one, it is the DER's sole responsibility to determine if it's a refusal to test. There are a couple of exceptions when it's the MRO's determination, but by and large, it is the DER's determination what is a refusal to test. You cannot delegate that responsibility to a TPA. You cannot delegate it to your collector. Now, your collector is going to document the circumstances or the situations that happen that constitute the refusal to test, but ultimately it is your responsibility as the DER to make that determination. Now, the DOT has pretty much said if you're going to go against what the collector said, then there better be a death certificate or something similar. So, for example, you have someone who goes to the clinic, they can't go, they're sitting there drinking water, or maybe they're not drinking water, they're just passing the time, and oops, I've got to go pick up my kids from daycare. No, that is not a legitimate excuse, that should be considered a refusal to test. They cannot leave the collection site once the test has started. You should call that a refusal to test. If the collector documents that and you as the DER come back and say, okay, that seems logical to me, yeah, you had to go get your kids, the DOT would not be happy with that decision. So you've got to make sure that, if you're overturning what the collector says, you've got really solid evidence that something catastrophic happened and that person had to leave. Now, one thing that this last bullet is important because we have a lot of DERs that don't understand when a refusal to test or what constitutes a refusal to test. If you have someone who goes to the clinic for a pre-employment test or a return to duty test, if they either don't show up or they leave prior to the test beginning, meaning when the cup is opened. So even if they go and they sign in and the clinic says there's a 30-minute wait, if they say, I'm not going to wait, and they leave, if that is a pre-employment test, that is not a refusal to test. It's super important now that we all understand that, because you're going to be reporting those refusals to test to the clearinghouse, and you don't want to report something to clearinghouse, have that driver be in a prohibited position if it's not truly a refusal to test. I was on a webinar just last week with Patrice Kelly, Patrice was the former head of ODAPSI, which is the arm of the DOT that makes all of our drug and alcohol testing rules. She is a fabulous person, credentials out the wazoo. I mean, she wrote the oral fluid testing rule. I mean, literally, she wrote the rule. But she was on a webinar saying, and she told a story that she was up in the Northeast making a presentation and went over this rule with the audience. And a gentleman came up to her afterwards and he said, I have a real problem. He said, I didn't understand that rule. And I've probably reported 20 refusals to the clearinghouse that were not refusals because they were pre-employment tests that the person didn't show up for. That is not a refusal to test by DOT standard. It should not be reported to the clearinghouse. If it's random, post-accident, reasonable suspicion, or follow-up, yes, that does constitute a refusal to test if they don't show up or if they don't stay through the completion of the test. But if it's pre-employment and return to duty, you want to make sure that it is not considered to be a refusal to test if they don't show up or if they leave prior to the test beginning. If they leave, if it's pre-employment and they leave after the test begins, then yes, that's a refusal to test. If they can't give enough and they leave, or they give a cold sample and they leave, that is definitely a refusal to test. But if they leave or they don't show up on a pre-employment, it is not a refusal to test. Okay. So that's just more of that same thing. Okay. Again, your decision to make. It's not your service agent's position to make. It's not the collector's. It is your duty under the regulation to make this call of what is a refusal to test. Okay. Another hot topic, marijuana rescheduling. I shared with Emily as we logged on a little bit early. I am so tired of talking about marijuana. I can't stand it. But we're going to talk about it some more. You've heard in the news that everybody wants to deschedule marijuana or reschedule it from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3. If it becomes a Schedule 3 drug, we would immediately have to stop testing for marijuana under the DOT rules, unless there is what we call a safety carve-out, meaning we are permitted to continue to test safety-sensitive individuals under the regulations. So if you want to fly through the air with a stone pilot, or you want to ride around 285 with a stone truck driver, then you can jump on the descheduling or rescheduling bandwagon. But I am not on that wagon. You will be riding solo. So I do not want to get in an airplane with a stoned pilot, and I don't want to get on 285 with a stoned truck driver. So I am not for rescheduling marijuana. INDACE's official position is that we're not taking a position on rescheduling. If it's going to be rescheduled, we are taking a position that we are adamant there must be a safety carve-out, which allows us to continue testing for marijuana. So please just know that that is out there. If if you've got friends and relatives, they're all about it. Just make sure they understand. I have some folks that are on the other side of that have a different position than I do. And then I said, well, how do you feel about, pilots not being drug tested for marijuana? They're like, well, that would be horrible. I'm like, well, this is what is coming. So again, if if it's rescheduled to a Schedule 3 or below, it immediately comes off the DOT drug testing panel. It's the way the regulation is written. There's nothing we can do about that. So we either have to lobby for leaving it as a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, or the safety carve out. So just be aware of that. And I promise you, I will keep you updated as to what happens, or if that's coming down the pike, I'll keep you updated as to that. If you have any questions, if you haven't already, please pop those in the chat. I should have said that earlier, and we will tend to those. Emily, I think we did have a couple questions. And there's my contact information if I can answer any other questions that you have specifically offline. So Emily, we had some questions.
The questions were, are the labs ready? Are the testing labs ready?
So again, they are in the process of certification. We anticipate that it will happen in fourth quarter of this year going into first quarter of 2025. We do have to have 2 separate laboratories that are certified. It's because you do have to have a primary testing lab and then a secondary lab for your split specimens to be tested. So we do have to have 2 labs that have completed the certification process. So we will let you know, and there will be lots of information out there when that does happen. And it's not only the testing labs, but we also have to get the lollipops out to the collection sites. So that'll be, the manufacturers have assured us that that's not an issue, but that does have, we have to have the supply of the testing collection devices.
Very good.
All right, cool. What's next question?
The other question, I believe you already answered it, was what would be the turnaround time on oral testing?
Yeah, so oral fluid testing time for, like I said, we're already doing some non-DOT oral fluid testing, and I've got some clients that are doing that for post-accident reasonable suspicion. And so I went back and I looked at what our turnaround time is, and it is pretty much equivalent to the urine testing turnaround time. It's about the same. Now, again, that is in a non-DOT environment. The DOT does have more quality control checks and more, the scientists have to sign off on the documentation that there's a separate process for DOT versus non-DOT. The test is the same, the science is the same, it's all good. It's just the paperwork's a little different. And so that may take a little bit longer, but by and large, the test process is pretty much the same. So it's a pretty quick turnaround, usually within 24 hours from the time the specimen hits the laboratory. If it's a negative specimen. If it's a positive, then it's going to take, of course, an additional 48 to 72 hours. Anything else? Any other questions? If you haven't had time to
Leslie,
type
I
it,
have one.
yeah, sure.
So at Wayne Davis, we do our own collection
Mhm.
for randoms and for non-recordable DOT incidents.
Yep.
And so with that, what is the collector's training timeline? How long do you know that as far as how long it takes for the training?
Sure. So it will be the same training process. The actual training event may take a little bit longer because, again, the collection is going to take a little bit longer. But we should be able. I think we can train folks probably if the collection devices are available, we'll be able to start training folks in fourth quarter. And we can talk about that offline if you want.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I've
Yeah,
got
so
a
it's
question.
just yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry.
No.
We use Abbott for all of our, And I'm assuming that when the oral testing is available, would that just be an option that will show up when we're doing the forms, or
Yeah.
and I guess if we're like searching for a clinic, will you be able to like filter if they offer that or not?
Absolutely. So, two things. When the forms changed in 2020, they were changed to accommodate oral fluid testing because actually federal employees are already can already do oral fluid testing. So if you look at the chain of custody, there's a box up there right underneath where you put the person's driver's license number and all that. There's a box that says urine or oral fluid. And so you can use the same chain of custodies for that. And then the collection sites will be indicating to the labs when they are ready to roll that out. And that will be, if you're using like an online scheduling process, that'll be indicated there. So you'll have the opportunity to select if you want urine or oral fluid.
Thanks.
Uh-huh. Any other questions? Okay. Well, so Emily and Bill, that's all I've got. Do you all have anything else that we didn't cover well enough you think we need to go back?
Sounded like you covered it all really, really, really well. Thank you.
Okay. So just as we have, I mean, there's my contact information. We're usually on the safety committee meeting. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And then we will be pushing out to the association as we get updated information. As the labs start to get certified, we will be pushing that out so that you have that information and you can work with your third-party administrators or your collectors, whomever your collection sites that you're using for that, so that so you can stay updated on that. So that's it. That's all I know.
Great. Thank you.